I was a young man, early 20s, just out of the army and a tour of Korea. I was teaching martial arts for a large athletic association that owned about 75 gyms, when one day, a couple of middle 30s aged women showed up for classes. They became students but didn't stick around long, a few months, and they left the gym. One of them had an apartment in town, and I'd see her from time to time. It turned out she was a divorced single mom with a young son, and we struck up a relationship after a while. She was something of a religious nut, claimed to be a reverend, and held to some pretty wild, charismatic style practices. But that didn't preclude me banging her weekly. Go figure. I would later find out just what her and her friends were actually into. And it was pretty bad. Turned out she was, among other things, a bigamist. I found this out when her still married to her husband, number 3, from Florida, showed up and wound up harassing me at work until he actually challenged me to a fight in the dojo, and I beat his ass thoroughly. He left, and evidently went back to Florida, but not before I found out both he and the Reverend's former husband had both been convicted of SA offenses in Florida. Both of them, so 2 out of 3. Meanwhile, the problem of her still being married to at least one guy while shacking up with me was complicated by the Reverend going around to various churches in the area and holding meetings/seminars and raising funds for her work. She operated a set of newsletters, which back in the pre-internet days was how alternative groups used to do their media. Lots of fundamentalist religious churches used them when I was a kid. As time went on, I found out her and her friends supposedly worked in combating satanic and witchcraft groups that were supposedly essaying kids in churches, daycares, and so on. This was back in the 80s when the satanic panic was all over the press and news of the day. This panic later turned out not only to be fake and the product of an entire industry of religious charlatans of the time, publishers, televangelists, and the rest, but resulted in entire groups of innocent adults being prosecuted for some of the most unbelievable and fantastic claims of bullshit crimes you've ever heard. Mass hysteria indeed. Meanwhile, the Reverend, who was making a good living off her ministry and collecting welfare and SSI money, neither her nor any of her friends worked ever, was getting involved with a set of local, charismatic churches. Turns out she had moved to my town because a well-known former Satanist high priest had a very successful church and ministry operating there, and she was hoping to glom onto the money. She got her big break when a local, charismatic set of ministers for a Vineyard church, man and wife couple, had a nasty divorce breakup with all kinds of wild allegations about child abuse, SA, satanic ritual abuse, and the rest. Supposedly the woman the husband had left his wife for was a, quote, practicing satanic, who was indoctrinating the wife, ministers, children into the black arts and doing things like essaying them and locking them in closets for days at a time to force their compliance. Their former minister father was supposedly all down for this. Just to complicate matters, the father also happened to be the son of a prominent local judge. So this was a real mess. In the end, the Reverend contacted some of her people in the Assembly of God churches in Florida, where their national headquarters were, and the mother of the children agreed to have them taken out of state to a safe house for children being SA'd and satanically abused in that state. The mother would not even know where her own children were. So a minister for the Assembly of God Church street ministry called Get This Angel. 2 complete squads of Florida SWAT teams intercepted us and surrounded the vehicle with drawn shotguns, a car with 3 small children in it. Remember I said that the husband's father was a prominent local judge? Yeah. So we were released and the kids were put on a plane back home. They didn't want the publicity of attempting to prosecute us. So we were left on our own in Florida for a couple weeks with cash and a car. That's where I found out just who the Reverend was and what she was actually a part of. Back in the 70s, a cult calling itself the Children of God was running around and doing a lot of nasty things to people. The signature of this cult was they would predate on existing Christian groups and poach members and money that way. Some guy named David Moses Bergen was the founder. Among the doctrines of this group were practices like flirty fishing, where women in the group, and I found out later, men, would use sex to recruit people or get favors, and they also practiced group sex and sex with minors, essaying kids. This led to the cult's eventual downfall, but many small cells of the COG cult had broken up and fled around the country, some even establishing groups overseas. And one of these cells had drifted into my hometown and set up their scam. Angel, who was a COG member, was making his living as a paid minister for the Assembly of God Church. Meanwhile, he was living in a trailer with 2 female strippers and selling drugs and guns on the side. His friends included a guy who claimed to be the original Nikki Sixx, and they ran a literal satanic coven and were even featured on the daytime talk show Geraldo. You can look it up. Meanwhile, people will say, "There's no way you didn't get arrested in Florida." Well, you'd be right, except I've been working for the police the entire time and wound up feeding the authorities information about the Reverend and her family, on and off for 3 years. And that's why we weren't arrested that day. But it gets worse before it gets better. After the fiasco with the kids, the Reverend left the state and went north to hook up with her other friend and their people south of Chicago. After a while, I went up and hung out with her again. She was living with her kid in a large, rented house, and she and her friends were doing their same old things. She introduced me to another woman also about 10 years older than me, and it wasn't long until she and I were involved, as that was how they did things. Eventually I moved in with her, and the Reverend was back doing her ministry with new people. She was still up to her neck in some weird, black magic, satanic practice stuff, all while running her Christian ministry. Yeah, confused yet? I was by then too. Also, by that time, I had compiled an entire set of files on these people. Names / dates / offenses, you name it. Gun running and fraud were just a part of it. Then, something happened. I guess my lover figured out things were going on. The Reverend was getting pulled in for questioning by the local cops quite a bit, and I was pulled in a couple times too. Members of the cult had begun making complaints about me to the local police for some false stuff, claiming I'd stolen a Ritual Athame knife that was very valuable, and the like. I never took part in any of the Reverend's ritual stuff, so I never even saw if said object existed. It would turn out later that about 8 members of the local police were involved in routinely using the sexual favors of members of the COG's women, and this was why they were questioning me. These cops later lost their positions. A couple had criminal charges, and at least one wound up in mental health care. Yeah, these people are destructive as hell. Then one night, my lover's oldest daughter, 12, ran off to our neighbor's house in the middle of the night and told them I had SA'd her. I was awakened from in my lover's bedroom in the middle of the night, as asked to report to the police station. So I and my lover went down. The cops had taken the girl's statement and had a pair of panties that had semen stains in them. My lover's panties from the floor of our bedroom, not her daughter's. But it was enough. I was cooked. I later took a plea, and to show how poor the case was against me, I am not and have never been a registered sex offender. But I've had plenty of discrimination against me because of my plea conviction. Like I said, the fallout included 8 local cops losing their jobs, but that wasn't all. The very judge in my case was later also convicted and sent to prison for, among other charges, a sex offense for soliciting a woman with cocaine stolen from a police evidence room. My plea conviction still stands. Meanwhile, a young boy, 15, who was one of the victims of the COG bunch and used by our friend the judge, wound up locked up in the Adult County Jail one weekend and happened to be murdered while there, but no one was ever charged or convicted for it. Want to call BS? The former judge's Boston governor and former senator was running for the vice presidency of the USA, and I contacted him 3 times through his campaign, and he quit his candidacy, left office, and hasn't hardly been seen since in 30 years. Our little sex offender judge wound up in prison for a while and was then released as a felon. The COG cell broke up, and the people ran for their asses. Wherever they wound up, who knows? Meanwhile, I rebuilt my life, but have been fired from jobs repeatedly because of my conviction. Petitioning to clear my name resulted in nothing. There are several rather powerful people who don't like me at all, and they've made that clear over the years, repeatedly. As for the girl, well, she and her mom/family were kept tabs on for the next several decades. She managed to have a life and a family and some kids, but died a couple years ago. Suicide. She'd been harassed by state authorities her entire adult life. Her mother was going to write and publish a tell-all book. A few months later, she lost her husband, home, and was living in a state-subsidized elderly folks' housing project. And no book was ever forthcoming. Peace.